It started with the first set of muddy footprints I found near the lake edge, just a few feet beyond the private access sign I had posted in bold, reflective lettering at the edge of my family's lake lot. My grandfather purchased this land before I was even born. 8 pristine acres of wooded shoreline, with a small dock, a fire pit, and a gravel drive that twisted just far enough off the main road to feel like stepping into a different world. The land had stayed in our name for generations, and I kept the boundaries meticulously marked and maintained. But lately, I'd noticed signs of intrusion: beer cans, cigarette butts, a half-burnt plastic chair, and once, even a tent stake left behind in the soft soil. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe hikers or kids, I told myself. But then came the confrontation. It was a warm Friday evening when I arrived at the cabin to find 3 large camping tents set up right on my property, complete with coolers, music, and foldable chairs circling a smouldering illegal fire. A group of people, none of whom I recognized, were lounging like they owned the place. They looked shocked when I pulled in, as if I was the one intruding. One of them, a burly guy in his 40s wearing a tank top and an attitude, stood up and said, "You lost, buddy?" I told them plainly, this was private land, they were trespassing, and they had 10 minutes to leave before I called the sheriff. That's when Karen showed up. Clad in oversized sunglasses and a sun hat that screamed HOA royalty, she marched up from the next lot over like she was walking a red carpet. "These are my guests," she snapped, arms crossed. "We're allowed to enjoy the lake. Your signs are a joke." I reminded her politely that this wasn't common land and never had been. I even showed her the deed, a laminated copy I keep in the glove box for situations just like this. Her eyes scanned it, and her lips curled into a sneer. "Fake," she muttered. "Nice try. But this whole shoreline's under HLA jurisdiction." That was a lie. My property was explicitly excluded from the HOA when it was formed decades ago, a detail I'd fought to maintain, and won in court twice. But Karen was one of those people who believed that yelling louder somehow made her more right. "If you don't leave," she said coldly, "I'll call the cops and have you removed. Let's see who they believe." True to her word, she pulled out her phone, turned her back to me, and began dialing 911. What she didn't know was that every inch of that lakeside had motion-triggered trail cameras, real ones, not just the fake deterrent some people put up. And they didn't just record faces. They recorded voices, timestamps, and every word that passed between us. I watched her lie to the dispatcher, claiming I was threatening her guests, but I had stalked them and was aggressively harassing people enjoying the common beach. I said nothing. I didn't need to.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
I said nothing. I didn't need to. Because the trap was already sataned soon, it would snap shut. I stood there calmly as the guests smirked, sipping drinks and acting like they had just won a round in some neighborhood game. Karen kept her phone at her ear, whispering theatrically for dramatic effect, turning occasionally to glance at me with a smug twist of her lips. But what she failed to notice were the subtle red lights blinking from 3 separate tree trunks. I had installed those trail cams not just for wildlife, but because I knew sooner or later someone like her would push their luck. I walked back to my truck and waited. 15 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. I recognized one of them, Deputy Marcus, from a zoning meeting last year. Solid guy, quiet, sharp-eyed. The second, a younger deputy named Randall, seemed more uncertain, likely new. As they stepped out, Karen practically sprinted to them, arms waving, voice high and panicked. "Officers! Thank God! That man is stalking us. He won't leave and he's threatening my guests." Randall looked at me, then up a tents behind her. Marquez, however, took a long breath and said, "That man?" He pointed at me. Karen nodded. "Yes! He just showed up here. Started screaming at us, claiming this was his land or something. It's clearly part of the HOA shoreline." I stayed where I was. Marquez turned to me and asked, You have ID on you? Oh! Of course, I said, handing it over, along with the original deed and a printed map from the county GIS database showing my parcel. Karen scoffed loudly. That's a forgery, she barked. Marquez didn't flinch. He reviewed the documents slowly, then asked if I had any other proof. Glad you asked, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the Live Trail Cam app. Within seconds, I pulled up video clips showing the moment the campers arrived, the moment Karen appeared, and her entire 911 call clear as day. The audio captured every lie, every word she twisted, every insult. I handed the phone to Marquez. He listened without interruption. Randall's eyebrows slowly rose. Karen, sensing something had shifted, tried to laugh it off. You can't just record people like that. That's illegal, she snapped. Marquez shook his head. It's your responsibility to know when you're on private land. And he can record anything that happens on his property. Which this, he tapped the map, very clearly is. Karen's smug face cracked. Her guests stopped laughing. One of them, a younger man with a beard actually, took a step back from the fire pit. Marquez turned to Randall and said, We've got a false police report, criminal trespass, and possibly harassment. Your call if you want to escalate. Karen's jaw dropped. Me? Harassment? She gasped. They're the ones camping without permission, I said quietly. And lying to law enforcement. The mood shifted like a summer storm. Karen turned pale. Her hands trembled. Didn't he thought this is outrageous, she cried. But it didn't matter. The trap had already sprung. What followed was swift. Randall handed back my ID, thanked me, and asked Karen and her guests to begin packing up. We're not making arrests today, he said firmly, but this is a formal warning. Any future incidents and you'll be cited and possibly detained. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Her guests mumbled among themselves, throwing gear into plastic tubs and cursing under their breath. No apology came. Not that I expected one. But I caught Karen glancing back at me just once as, if unsure how her carefully managed facade.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Back at me just once as, if unsure how her carefully managed facade had crumbled so quickly. And I just stood there, quiet, calm, patient. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't have to shout. It just has to wait. After the trespassers finished packing and the tents were gone, the smell of extinguished firewood still lingered in the air like the last breath of their arrogance. The deputies stayed until the group left in a pair of dented SUVs, and not once did Karen look back. As her taillights disappeared down the gravel lane, Deputy Marquez turned to me. You handled that better than most, he said. I nodded, offering a tight smile. It's not the first time I've had to defend this land. Probably won't be the last. He glanced at the camera mounts. Smart to set those up. Experience, I replied. And a lack of trust in HOA politics. Marquez gave a knowing chuckle. Well, keep the footage. If this turns into anything else, you've got your defense airtight. I assured him I had backups on cloud and 2 drives. After they left, I walked the lot, making sure nothing was left behind. No trash, no broken glass, no burnt plastic. What I did find, though, buried under some loose leaves near the edge of the dock, was a small laminated card that read, HOA Guest Access Temporary. It was signed with Karen's full name and the HOA logo embossed beside it. She had issued her guests permission like it was her kingdom to lend. That card ended up in my folder too. Evidence. And fuel. Because by then, I had already decided I wasn't just going to let this go. Karen had escalated from passive-aggressive notes and gossip to filing false reports, inviting uninvited people to my land, and putting my name in the sheriff's log. That wasn't going to be ignored. So I went home and gathered everything: videos, photos, deed copies, county maps, even the card I found under the leaves. Then I drafted a formal letter. Not to Karen. Not to the HOA. But to the county zoning board, the sheriff's office, and the HOA's insurance provider. I wanted the truth documented in every official channel that mattered. And in the days that followed, the ripple began. HOA board members who had once supported Karen began reaching out quietly, cautiously, asking for clarification, or offering apologies on behalf of the community. But I didn't respond right away. I waited, because I knew this wasn't just about one lie or one night. This was about the principle of ownership, of boundaries, of abuse by those in small offices with too much imagined power. What Karen didn't realize was that in trying to trap me with a false 911 call, she'd triggered something far more serious. A reckoning. And what came next would change everything for her, for the HOA and for how this land was treated forever. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Less than 72 hours after I submitted the incident documentation to the HOA's insurer and the county's zoning office, I received a call from a county compliance officer asking if I was available for a site inspection the following morning. He arrived promptly at 9 a.m., clipboard in hand, serious face, wearing khaki pants and a tucked-in badge that suggested he took his job seriously. I walked him through the property boundaries, the incident timeline, and showed him the trail camera footage. He watched it all with tight-lipped concentration, occasionally scribbling notes. When the video clip ended with Karen clearly trespassing and issuing a knowingly false statement, he looked at me and said, "Do you mind if I request copies of this for formal records?" I handed him a USB and a hard copy printout of the GIS parcel map. "It's all here," I said. He nodded. This might go beyond zoning enforcement. And he was right. Because by then, the situation had reached a tipping point. Karen had returned to the neighborhood as if nothing had happened, walking her dog with a fake smile and loud greetings to anyone within earshot. But what she didn't know, at least, not yet, was that the board was quietly turning on her. 3 members had already contacted me to request a copy of my footage and confirm whether Karen had given her guests unauthorized access. Apparently, this wasn't her first overreach. A week later, the HOA board held an emergency closed-door meeting. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to attend. Angela, a long-time resident with a good heart and even better memory, slipped me a message that evening. It simply read, "She's suspended pending review." I knew it was just the beginning. Over the next 10 days, I watched as the tightly knit power structure Karen had built through intimidation, gossip, and procedural manipulation began to collapse in real time. One neighbor came by with muffins and a hesitant apology. Another sent me a text message thanking me for standing up. And then came the letter from the HOA's legal advisor, asking for a formal meeting to discuss the incident and its implications. That meeting changed everything. I arrived at the clubhouse, a modest log structure that usually hosted book clubs and potlucks, and walked into a room of 15 people, most of whom I'd never seen speak aloud in public. Angela greeted me, offered coffee, and handed me a seat at the front of the U-shaped table. Karen, notably, was absent. The legal counsel, an outside attorney named Rains, explained the purpose. To address the legal exposure created by Karen's unauthorized issuance of access passes, her false statements to law enforcement, and her use of HOA authority to violate private land rights. I laid out everything calmly: facts, dates, video, maps, witness logs. No emotion. Just truth. By the time I finished, the room was dead quiet. Angela cleared her throat and said, "Well, I think that answers every question we had." The board voted unanimously to remove Karen permanently. But they didn't stop there. They passed an immediate motion requiring all HOA officers to undergo training in property law and personal liability. They also rescinded all existing HOA guest access policies pending review. It was, by every measure, a complete overhaul. I should have felt vindicated. And I did somewhat. But more than anything, I felt tired. The kind of tired that comes from knowing how close things came to escalating in the wrong direction. A single lie could have ruined my reputation. A false arrest. A civil suit. A stain that wouldn't wash off. But instead, thanks to foresight, calm, and the truth captured in video, the tide had turned. I returned to the cabin that weekend, unsure of how the neighborhood would respond. But what I found surprised me. People waved. A few.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Found surprised me. People waved. A few stopped to talk. Kids rode bikes past my gate without their parents calling them back in a panic. Angela even dropped off a bottle of wine with a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for protecting this place better than the board ever did." It was the first time in years that the lake lot didn't feel like a contested frontier. It felt like home. Weeks passed. Then, months. Karen's house was put up for sale quietly, no open house, no fanfare. Her name disappeared from HOA emails and announcements. I never saw her again, though I occasionally heard stories about her trying to join another HOA a few towns over, where she reportedly ran into similar resistance. As for me, I kept living quietly. But one afternoon, Angela returned this time not with wine, but with a proposal. "We want to rewrite the bylaws," she said. "But not behind closed doors. We want you to help lead the committee." I nearly laughed. Me? I'm not exactly known for being collaborative. She smiled. "Exactly why we need you. You care more about fairness than politics." I agreed grudgingly at first. But something happened as we met weekly under the breezy pine shade by the dock. Pens in hand, laptops open, neighbors actually listening. I watched the power shift not to me, but to the people. We redefined the rules. We included landowners previously ignored. We added mediation clauses. We created a public log of board decisions. And every time a clause about property rights came up, they deferred to me. If it's in writing, I'd say, let it match the map, not the rumor. And for once, people agreed. The HOA slowly transformed from a symbol of control into a symbol of stewardship. And I knew the real reason wasn't just Karen's downfall. It was the truth. The documented, time-stamped, irrefutable truth that no threat, no power trip, no shouted lie could erase. In the end, Karen's collapse wasn't my victory. The community's awakening was. And that lake lot, with its smoothed-out gravel path, new fire ring, and untouched dock, remained exactly where it was mine. Not just on paper, but in the eyes of every person who now knew exactly where the lines were drawn. Not by Karen, not by fear, but by law, by integrity and by the quiet power of setting the trap and waiting for it to spring. The transformation of our community didn't end with Karen's removal. It sparked something larger. Residents who had once been silent began participating in open meetings. Long-time feuds between neighbors began to thaw. We started holding lakeside cleanup events, not because the HOA mandated them, but because we finally took pride in where we lived. Angela initiated a newsletter that featured real contributions from homeowners' stories, recipes, event ideas, and even anonymous concerns that could be addressed constructively. I was asked to write the first editorial. I titled it, "Lines in the Water: What Boundaries Really Mean," and it resonated more than I expected. People referenced it during meetings. One neighbor printed it and framed it in their foyer. Slowly, the HOA wasn't just a policy-making body, it became a real community forum. We installed a shared library near the mailbox bank. We organized kayak races for kids and stargazing nights in the fall. We created a shared digital map showing who owned what, replacing years of guesswork and assumptions with clarity and cooperation. For the first time, transparency replaced territorialism. And me? I found peace not just in reclaiming what was mine, but in watching the whole neighborhood wake up to the power of truth. Because when you set a trap, It's not always about catching someone. Sometimes, it's about showing others where the real danger lies and how to avoid ever falling in again.